back again. Thanks so much, Thomas, for coming on board. This is good to have you there, and to good to you actually to respond to these questions. And folks, you've done some great questions. These are good. These are important, and we've taken the best ones. Many of you are saying the same thing, so we just grabbed out ones that reflect what quite a few are saying, and this is one of them. And so this one, though others you have asked this, is from TFM, which is True Form Motivations. And this is what he says. Luxenberg, this is Christoph Luxenberg. This is the book that we introduced earlier. Christoph Luxenberg, and the one that has gone viral with over 93,000 people have now watched about this book, where Thomas unpacked it and showed the 7 different categories, or 7 different layers of peeling it apart, peeling it down the Arabic to get back to the original text. That was done by Christoph Luxenberg. It was published in 2003, I think in Germany in 2000, am I correct?
2000, yeah.
And then that is now, so it's been around for almost 20 years, but we're only just putting it up now so people can see it. And I think for many of you, this is the first time you've heard what Luxemburg came up with. And this is why the question by TFM. Luxemburg's argument from that book are considered extreme in academia, and his conclusions are not tangible for the most part by academics. Which doesn't mean all of what he argues is wrong, but much must be weighed by the critical method of academia, because the Quran, even with Syrian loan words, have many similarities with the Jewish targums than with Christian narratives, and so could be argued that it is Jewish instead of Christian lectionaries. That's what Joe from Red Judaism argues, that this is both and. Therefore, have been several criticisms of his work by Western academics like Angelica Neuwirth and also Francois Dubois, among many others. So what basically the question is, why is it that these academics like Neuwirth and Dubois, why don't they accept him? And why is it that academia has not accepted him wholesale yet?
Yeah, so I think what's at the bottom of this is that it is indeed groundbreaking, right? It is extreme. His views are extreme compared to what has gone on before. And it's always a hard sell to people who've devoted their lives to a certain way of viewing things. One analogy I always like to give is the theory of plate tectonics. Unfortunately, I forgot the guy's name, but the guy who came up with it, when he first presented his idea that the continents move, he was laughed out of the room. Like every scientists said, this is absurd. Continents move, that can't happen. It took 50 years, and it wasn't that anybody changed his mind. It's just that the old guard was eventually replaced. And then the younger people who had like more of an open mind, they saw his arguments and they saw that it makes sense, and eventually it got accepted. And I think something similar is going on here. So it's the old guard, it's the people who have really been on this for a long time with like a set way of going about things, who are most vocal against Luxemburg. And I think the 2 names here, so we have who were mentioned, like Francois de Blois. So when you look at his criticism, it's really, there's no substance to it. He just attacks Christoph Luxemburg. He says he's a dilettante who doesn't know what he's doing, even though if you look at this CVs, Luxemburg definitely has more of an academic record than Francois de Blois. So that was just ad hominem, and he didn't have an argument at all. And when you look at Angelica Neuwirth, she really is the face of the status quo academia in regards to the Quranic studies. But her criticism is really more about public relations. So she says things like, this is not helpful what he's doing in dialogue with the Muslim world, things like that, which don't have much to do with his core argument. There are other people from like this sphere around Angelica Neuwirth, for instance, who have made arguments against Luxemburg, but they come down to, if they tackle him at all, they come down to nitpicking. Say, okay, well, in this case, maybe we should read it slightly differently, and in that case, he may have gone a bit overboard because the Aramaic form that he used is very rare, and so it's really on that level, but it's not on the level that here his approach is totally flawed. So that really doesn't happen. And actually, when you look at what these like people like Angelika Neuwirth are doing, they're doing something very similar actually. So they would totally agree that there are Aramaic words in the Quran. Wouldn't reject that. They would just say, "Yeah, Luxemburg, he's a bit too radical. He finds too many Aramaic words." But they would agree that there are Aramaic words. And when you look at Luxemburg's 7-step approach that we introduced, what people like Angelika Neuwirth are doing is very similar. It's just they have less steps. Let's put it that way, right? So they confine themselves more. They aren't ready to just, for instance, ignore the dots and put them elsewhere. But the principal approach is very similar, and they come to similar conclusions where their approach fits, right? So that you can read papers by them where they make very similar arguments than what Luxemburg is making. It's just at the same time they try to distance themselves because it feels like it's more of a political move than actually driven by science. Because, as you said, they say things like, "Yeah, it's not helpful in the dialogue of cultures." Well, that's not the job of science, right? That's the job of politicians. But the scientists or the scholars, they should look for the truth, basically. Yeah. And yeah, so what they're doing is very similar. They're just restricting themselves a bit more mentally. But I think future generation, we can already see this. So the younger people, they are on board, and you can see more and more young scholars who actually continue the work that Luxemburg started.
Okay, let me just take this one step further then. Let me just ask you this. Angela Neuwirth, she's using the same thing you say. She's using the same categories. This is called textual criticism. When the 7 steps that he has, the 7 different categories, 7 different means by which he comes to his conclusions. And sometimes he comes to his conclusions within the 3rd step. Sometimes it's in the 5th step. Sometimes he has to go all 7 steps before he finally finds that word. Now, if this is the case, and that's straight no-brainer textual critical analysis, and Angela Neuwirth is doing the same thing, why isn't she coming to the same conclusions as him?
Well, as I said, so they restrict themselves a bit more. So they do accept this this narrative of an oral tradition, for instance, which is why they say, well, if we start moving around the diacritical dots, like everything is up for grabs. So let's just stick to the text as it is today. So that's the main difference. So they restrict themselves a bit more. They limit the methods that they're using based on more of an acceptance of this Islamic narrative as it exists today.
Okay, I'm going to keep pushing back on this. Forensic testing, forensic evidence starts from the premise if there is a mystery in front of you, if there's something that needs to be solved, you peel it away until you get to the solution. In this case, what Christoph Luxemburg, he's looking at that 25% of the Quran that is what you call the dark passages. Nobody understands it, including Angela Neuwirth. She doesn't understand it, nor do the Muslim scholars understand it. Christoph Luxemburg, by doing the 7 steps of peeling away, layer by layer by layer, getting down and finding what that 25% means, and is able not only to find what it means, he's able to find antecedents in lectionaries from which it is derived. That, to me, forensically speaking, has then solved the problem. How is it that Neuwirth can say that this is extreme, when that's exactly what you're asked to do of any text that makes no sense, including these dark passages? If you then uncover and find out what the meaning is, and you go even a step further and say, well, here is where it's borrowed from. We even know who the original writer is and when it was written and where it was written. And we know that this was much earlier and that this was a lectionary, a well-known lectionary at this certain time and date. One of the examples I'm giving you is a Surah 23. I don't know if you've seen what Odon, Guillaume D has done this very thing. Guillaume D has taken across and found that this beautiful hymn about the believers in Surah 23 and the duties of the believer and then the rewards of the believers from verse 1 up to verse 11 can be found exactly word for word, strophe for strophe from a beautiful hymn by Ephraim written in the 4th century, written in Aramaic, taken and then bastardized because one verse has been added, verse 6, which has nothing to do with the hymn, all about the chastity, about how the believer must be chaste. And yet except for those which your right hand possesseth. That bastardized chastity, where that was added at a later date. So here is an example of doing the same thing Christoph Luxemburg did, taking away all these layers, coming back and not only finding what the original text is, a gorgeous hymn really about believers, written in the fourth century by a man named Ephraim. We know who wrote it. We know when it was written. We even know why it was written. How can you say that this is extreme, or that this is not acceptable, or this becomes a hard sell, or that this disrupts the consensus? Well, shouldn't the consensus be looking for that very kind of solution? And if he can find it, if Guillaume D can find it, if Christoph Luxemburg and Gunther Luling can find it, why can't Neuwirth find it? And I would suggest maybe the Neuwirth are, this may be something that's upsetting them more than academia is. It's not the academic exercise that's upsetting them. It's possibly that this may be upsetting Muslims more than anybody else.
Definitely. So that could be the answer, because as I just said, that in their interviews where they asked her about Luxemburg, that's basically always her answer. It's, this is not a helpful approach. We want to have dialogue with the Muslim world and so on, and we need to involve them more, get their points of view on board. So I think this is more a PR move than actually a scholarship point. At least that's how it comes across to me.
Can I push that back one more step? Where does Angela Neuwirth, and this is why I need to ask you. I know here in Britain, and certainly the United States, almost all of these different academic institutions are in universities, on the university campuses. These are Middle Eastern studies. Almost all the Middle Eastern studies are funded by oil money coming from OPEC or from Middle Eastern countries. Primarily countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, they are the ones that are funding many of the chairs. We had this problem there at the School of Oriental and African Studies. When I was studying there, the Sultan of Brunei built it a $10 million building with the understanding that the head of department would be an academic that they chose that came from Saudi Arabia, who had no Western training whatsoever. And if this is the case, then wouldn't the Angela Neuwirth, who are chairs in these departments, don't they have to be careful what they say in public, because that might stop the funding of the very departments that pay them their salaries?
There could be. To be honest, I've never looked at who funds them. I don't think the situation is as extreme as in the UK, but I would need to look into this. So I can't answer you here, unfortunately.
Well, this is. I'll put that out there for others to respond to. We're finding that this was certainly the case when I was in Britain. I'm hearing that this is also the case in other schools here in the United States, where much of the funding comes from the East, and with that funding comes also strings attached. And one of them is the funding will continue if certain scholars don't say certain things, and this is shut down and almost censored in some cases. And I don't want to give names right now, because I have to be careful, because I know of specific examples where this is the case. So that may be behind what Neuwirth is saying. It may be also behind what Dubois is saying. Maybe we need to be careful that they don't have the freedoms that you and I have, or they don't have the freedoms that Luxemburg, who really, that's not even his name. He had to use a pseudonym. We don't even know who this guy is. He has to use a pseudonym for even.
As far as I know, Dubois is actually in the UK, so it might be that he's actually in one of those institutions where he can't say everything that he may want to say. I don't know, but yeah, he's definitely in the UK.
Listen, I don't think it's only unique to UK. I think this is all over Europe. I would suggest that
could be. Yeah.
Maybe they're in Germany as well. Anyhow, we need to move on. There are many other things we need to get up, but this is exciting. This is good to know that we in some ways we should not expect the academics to really be ballyhooing and lifting up Christoph Luxemburg and Gunther Luling. I mean, the question always, people have been asking me this: why was Gunther Luling thrown out of the university when he had such a stellar doctorate, highest degree you can get? Why in the world was he thrown out in 1972? Do you know the answer to that?
Well, I think I said in the original video. Yeah, he stepped on some toes, and it was really this actually was the predecessor of Angelika Neuwirth. Basically, he wrote a review of his doctorate thesis where he ripped it apart, which basically ended his career. Why he did that, hard to tell. I couldn't say.
Okay, and this is fascinating because have there been any response to that ripping apart? Did Gunther Luling come back with a response?
He did, and he worked it into his book. So the book that's on sale is actually the result of that. So he took his old doctorate thesis and he basically put the response to this critique in there. So it's all in there.
But it never resurrected him to be brought back into.
No, well, not until the translation, until it really got more of a international resonance, and that's really now he's rehabilitated. I mean, there's still some things that people disagree with, obviously, but his approach has now been totally rehabilitated, and he's now basically a respected scholar again.
Let me just give you a moderate example, exactly what we're talking about. This book right here, written by Dr. Dan Brubaker, when it came out, this is a little over 100 pages. There was an article written about a year and a half later by a man named Haitham Sikki from Chicago. Haitham Sikki does not have a degree in anything that was Islamic. I think he's into medicine or biology. He's not an academic in Islam at all that I'm aware of. And yet he wrote on almost equal size, an enormous article in a Muslim magazine that just absolutely tore this to pieces as best he could. Dan Brubaker wrote a response to it, explaining exactly and showing error after error after error that Haitham Sikki made, and responded to it, sent it to the same journal that Haitham Sikki had been given this enormous space to write this scathing criticism, and they wouldn't allow him to publish it at all. They wouldn't take it. They said, no, there's no need to. We don't accept this. So he had no right to reply. He had to then put his response to Haitham Sikki up on academia.edu, which takes everything. And you can see it up there today. So that Muslims have never seen the response, and almost every Muslim who ever talks about that book says, "Oh, Haitham Sikki has destroyed him," without realizing there is a comeback, and yet that comeback is not permitted in the same journal that introduced it. And I think there is a double standard here. There seems to be a double standard. We're bringing it up here, and I think this may be one reason why you are finding the older school. And I'm glad to see it is the older school that's having a problem with Christoph Luxenberg and with the building, but not the new ones. And it's the new ones we can be encouraged by, because they're the ones that are going to take it and run it forward. And I'm so glad to hear you're saying that Gunther Luling has now been resurrected. He died in 2015, and before he died, he was actually given applauded for what he had did way back in the 1970s, albeit 40 years too late, but nonetheless, bless him that he did the work he did. Thank you so much. This has been exciting. This has been interesting. I hope TFM, True Form Motivation, you have been answered. This is also going to cause an awful lot of, this is going to be something that we'll probably be talking about in the future as well, because this is an ongoing problem, difficulty. I've seen it in my own ministry. I've seen it in my own academic exercises where I have been ridiculed and hammered by other academics. But the people on the ground, the people who are actually using the material that we're bringing out, especially in Fander Films, have been able to use it, and they've been given the freedom to do so. Even Patricia Corona said this to my face in her office before I did my debate in 1995, when I went up to get her points, and she was the one that really put my debate together. And I said, "Why aren't you debating this? This is your material. You're the one who actually found this. It was one that you have done the journal work on this." And she looked at me and she just kind of laughed, and she says, "Jay, I have a chair to protect. I have an institution I represent here at Cambridge University. I could never debate this in public, but you have no chair to protect. You have no institution you represent." And then she went on and says, "Actually, you do have someone. The only person you represent is Jesus Christ, because you've told me that's why you're doing it." It says, "You have the freedom that I don't have." Now, this is back in 1995. She told me this. So we're talking about 26 years ago. She told me this, and that's where the penny dropped for me. And maybe that's where, Thomas, we need to help people out. Much of this that we're introducing on Fander Films, much of the material that you have been introducing is controversial. It is highly confrontational. And for many academics, they dare not touch it. It is poison. It is toxic to them. because it was toxic to their careers. It is toxic to the chairs they represent. It is toxic to the institutions that are supporting them and giving them their salary. And it will shut down, close down. It will shut down and close down many doors and windows and opportunities for them to get into museums, for them to get into to get into dig sites, or even to go into universities, especially in Muslim countries, or even to get into the countries to look at manuscripts. So they cannot say what they know. And I would suggest that this is one of the only areas that I'm aware of in academia where what you learn and what you say may destroy your career, like it did to Gunther Luling. It destroyed his career. For 30 years, he was in obscurity. 30 years he was in obscurity because of what that one individual did, who is the precursor to Angela Neuwirth. And if that is the case, can you then understand why, in many respects, getting back to asking the question, why is it that the academics are not lifting this up and praising Christoph Luxenberg and praising Gunther Luling, is because of the institutions they represent and the chairs that they have to protect. They have a different remit than you and I, which means we have a lot more freedom to say it, get it out into the public sphere. That's why we're using YouTube. And that's why what you're bringing us, Thomas, is so invaluable, because you have the freedom to say this. You have the freedom to even take the questions and respond to them. What the rest of you who are listening need to do is make sure it doesn't just stay here. Get it out. Get it out to as far and wide as you can. And especially for Muslims, they need to hear this material. They need to engage with it, and they need to come to conclusions on it. Well, this has been great. Thanks so much, Thomas, for not only responding to these questions, for taking the time to do so, but doing so intelligibly and so really understandably, so we can understand it so much better. God bless you. This is Thomas there in Germany, 4,000 miles away, myself here in the United States. Over and out.